Arrival at the academy. The stars above Virexon glowed like scattered fireflies in a jar, cold and distant. The Galactic Warfare Academy, carved from the heart of a colossal asteroid, pulsed with life. Here, cadets from across the 12 major systems trained to become the next generation of military leaders. Among the new arrivals was Kale, a young cadet from the Siraxi Dominion. His skin shimmered like polished stone, eyes sharp with ambition. Beside him hovered Tren, a soft-spoken Mernin with bioluminescent gills that blinked with every emotion. They were nervous, but eager. This was the galaxy's most elite training facility, where strategy, strength, and survival were forged. The group of cadets entered a colossal chamber, its ceiling so high, it vanished into shadow. At the center stood a tall figure, Commander Thalexa. She wasn't just a legend. She was a survivor of the Porith campaign, the war that nearly tore the Andromedan arm apart. Her presence made the air feel heavier. "Today," she announced, her voice echoing through the chamber, "you begin tactical histories. We will study warfare across species, and one in particular." A hologram flared to life, showing a blue and green planet slowly rotating in space. Planet, Earth. Species, human. Primitive in tech, yet unpredictable in behavior. You will study them deeply. Kale frowned. Humans? He'd read the briefings. Low-level tech, no advanced space fleet, barely reaching their own moon. What could possibly be worth studying? "Your assignment," Commander Thalexa continued, "is to observe 15 hours of human warfare, analyze patterns, identify flaws, understand how they survive." No one dared laugh, though some exchanged glances. A few whispered to each other. Tren leaned closer to Kale. "Why them?" "I don't know," Kale whispered back. "But if Commander Thalexa says it's important, we take it seriously." Their study group formed by the evening. Kale, Tren, and two others. Vor, a brute-scaled Orcan warrior with zero patience, and Lyra, a quick-witted Braylon whose eyes processed combat data faster than any AI. The archive room was silent except for the low hum of crystal servers. They initiated the footage. First up, grainy black-and-white visuals from something labeled World War I. Humans in muddy trenches, explosions all around. The visuals were raw, unfiltered, screams, smoke, and soldiers charging with bayonets into machine gun fire. "What are they doing?" Vor muttered. "They're not retreating," Lyra said, narrowing her eyes. "They're dying to gain ground." Tren's gills blinked rapidly. "That's not rational." Next came something called World War II, footage from snowy ruins. Buildings collapsed. Civilians running. Soldiers dragging wounded through streets. One scene showed a soldier shielding a child with his own body as a shell hit nearby. "Why protect the weak?" Vor growled. "Tactically, it's a waste." "No," Lyra replied quietly. "It's, something else. They're fighting for more than survival." Hours passed. The team was quiet now. No jokes, no sarcasm. The footage shifted to jungle warfare. Heat, insects, infections. Soldiers charging through waist-deep swamps. One soldier was hit, bleeding, limping, still fighting. "I don't understand," Tren finally whispered. "They feel pain, right?" "They feel it," Kale answered. "They just choose to keep moving anyway." By the 8th hour, the group had stopped analyzing tactics. They were watching, studying, silently absorbing what they could no longer explain with logic. "They have no armor," Vor growled, almost in frustration. "No secondary hearts. Their bones break easily. How do they win?" "They outlast," Lyra whispered. "They endure." The final video for the night was marked Omaha Beach. Humans leapt from boats into waves filled with bullets. Dozens fell instantly. The survivors still charged forward, pressing through fire and death. Kale leaned forward, jaw clenched. He felt it now, not just confusion or awe, but something deeper. "Fear. These aren't just soldiers," he said, his voice hoarse. "There's something else." Tren's bioluminescence dimmed, a signal of emotional overload. What kind of species runs into death like it's just another option? No one answered. They didn't have to. The room was cold now. Or maybe it just felt that way. As they left, Kale paused by the exit. I think Commander Thalexa wanted us to see more than strategy, he said. Vor grunted. She wanted to scare us. Well, Lyra muttered. It worked. As they walked down the empty corridor toward the dormitories, not one of them spoke. What they'd seen tonight couldn't be unseen. Humans weren't weak. They were dangerous, and no one knew why. Yet the madness beneath the courage morning came late to the Galactic Warfare Academy. But none of the cadets in Kale's group had slept. Not even Tren, whose species could regenerate clarity with just 20 minutes of deep-breathing meditation. Whatever they'd seen in the human footage last night had shaken something inside them, something primal. Commander Thalexa summoned their class to the simulation dome. The large amphitheater buzzed with excitement from other cadet groups who had watched footage of simpler alien species, beast warriors with brute strength or energy-wielding insectoids. They were ready to present basic analyses. But Kale and his group weren't ready at all. They hadn't just watched. They had witnessed. Your team looks pale, sneered a cadet from the Norqual Empire as they passed. Humans scare you, Rockskin? Kale didn't respond. He wasn't sure if it was because he didn't want to, or because he couldn't. His chest felt heavy with something he hadn't learned a name for yet. That evening, they returned to the archives. Lyra started first. I think we need to understand how they create these warriors. How does a species with such fragile bodies produce such mental endurance? Let's start with their training, Kale said. Computer, show Earth Special Operations Preparation. Keywords, extreme conditions, mental stress, and resilience testing. What followed made them wish they hadn't asked. The screen shifted to footage labeled Navy SEAL Buds Training, Hell Week. Human candidates were crawling through mud, carrying logs heavier than their body weight, screaming through icy waves. They were sleep-deprived, hypothermic, and yet still moving. One human collapsed from exhaustion. An instructor shouted in his face, and he got back up, shaking, broken, barely holding his weapon, but standing. They're not being forced, Tren whispered. That bell. They can quit whenever they want. But they don't, Kale murmured. They choose this. Next came footage from French Foreign Legion desert drills. Men trudged through scorching dunes with bleeding feet, lips cracked open from dehydration. One fell unconscious. The others didn't leave him. They carried him. The program cut to Russian Spetsnaz hand-to-hand combat. Bone broke, teeth flew, but no one cried out. The trainees were silent even as their limbs twisted unnaturally. Computer, Lyra commanded, what is the human purpose behind this level of suffering? Answer. To prepare the mind to override the body, to simulate conditions of war, to identify individuals who will fight when every rational instinct says to stop. Override the body, Tren repeated, blinking slowly. That's not instinct, that's programming. They reprogram themselves. The final clip was labeled SEER Training, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape. The screen filled with scenes of humans being captured, interrogated, and tortured. Under simulation. In one clip, a young soldier blinked in a coded pattern. The subtitles explained, torture. He was signaling home command while pretending cooperation with his captors. No one would choose that, Vor grunted, almost whispering now. No species would willingly train for torture. Humans do, Kale said quietly. Not because they enjoy it, but because they expect it. The team sat in silence for several moments. Even the archive room seemed to breathe slower. Finally, Tren broke the silence. I want to see what they do when they're truly outnumbered. Not trained soldiers, just regular humans. Kale hesitated, then nodded. Computer, show us. Historical instances of civilian uprisings, resistance, suicide missions, last stands. The system displayed a long list. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Alamo, Thermopylae, Shiroyama, the partisan uprisings, Pavlov's house, the Maidan stand. The Kurdish resistance. Scene after scene flooded the room. Unarmed humans resisting with stones, Molotovs, rusted rifles. Soldiers who had lost both legs still pulling triggers. Civilians choosing to die with their families rather than be enslaved. Kale's voice cracked. Why do they keep doing this? Tren's light pulsed dimly. Maybe it's not. About victory, Lyra chimed in, eyes wide. They don't fight to win. They fight to mean something, even in death. The room dimmed to near darkness as the footage continued. Black and white video from the siege of Stalingrad filled the space. A man, alone in a building riddled with holes, held off a company of enemy troops for 60 hours. The database identified him only as Private Ivan, confirmed kills, 300. Why didn't he run? Vor whispered. Why didn't he hide? He wasn't trying to live, Kale said. He was trying to matter. The screen went blank. For the first time, no one asked the computer to continue. No words were spoken. The silence was thick, but something had changed. Something in each of them had cracked. Not out of fear, but revelation. And in that silence, they all knew. This wasn't just about humans being strong. This was about humans being terrifyingly willing, not to destroy others, but to destroy themselves for something greater. What they're willing to die for. The next day, a quiet tension followed Kale and his team like a shadow. Most cadets walked the halls laughing, teasing, rehearsing presentations on minor species with poor coordination and laughable tactics. Kale's group, on the other hand, felt like they had stepped into a dimension where war had meaning far beyond victory or strategy. The commander's assignment was no longer just about humans. It was about understanding the unthinkable. That evening, back in the archives, Tren initiated a new query. Computer, he said slowly, his gills barely fluttering. Show us human combat behavior when survival is statistically impossible, when they know they're going to lose. The screen lit up with footage from Thermopylae. The story unfolded of 300 human warriors standing against a force over 100,000 strong, knowing their death was certain. No retreat, no surrender. Just a delaying tactic for others to escape. Then came the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, starving civilians with homemade explosives resisting professional Nazi soldiers. They held off the invaders for almost a month. Why? Vor asked, barely above a whisper. What did they think they could achieve? Hope, Lyra said softly. They did it to give hope. One of the clips transitioned into a more recent event. A small platoon in Afghanistan, surrounded, low on ammo. The video showed them defending an outpost against an overwhelming enemy force. One soldier was heard saying, "Tell my mom I held the line." Kale's hands clenched into fists. He didn't notice it. Computer, he said, almost hoarse. How often do humans choose death in combat rather than surrender? A pause. Then, over 3,500 recorded incidents of last stands across human military history. Documented reasons include protection of comrades, defense of civilians, national pride, moral principle, or symbolic resistance. Symbolic? Tren asked, blinking rapidly. They die to make a point? The footage shifted again. This time, a single human soldier lay injured beside a wounded comrade. Enemy fire rained around them. The injured man, bleeding from his gut, pulled a grenade, nodded at the other soldier, and rolled away. A blinding flash. Silence. A single line of translated audio from the survivor played. He knew we both wouldn't make it. So he made sure, at least one of us did. Lyra turned away, tears forming in her eyes. Not because of physical pain, but something worse. This is insanity, Vor growled, but even he sounded less certain than usual. No, Kale said, almost reverently. This is devotion, it's something beyond logic. Next, Tren requested something he had been afraid to ask for the night before. Show us suicide missions, the ones with no chance of return. The screen flashed with clip after clip. Japanese kamikaze pilots, human torpedo operators, volunteer, squads sent to destroy enemy guns without backup. It wasn't just the missions, it was the faces. Calm, determined, some smiling, saying goodbye, writing letters, whispering names of their loved ones before walking into death, not because they wanted to die, but because they believed their death mattered. They know, Lyra whispered. They know they won't come back, and they do it anyway. That's not warfare, Cale muttered. That's philosophy. More footage followed. Soldiers shielding children from blast zones. Medics patching up others while bleeding to death themselves. Entire units walking into gunfire to protect civilians. Then the screen displayed a new section. Military codes of honor. A few stood out. Leave no man behind. Death before dishonor. No greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. That's their strength, Tren said, glowing dimly. That's what makes them unstoppable. They don't just fight. To survive, they fight for each other, for honor, for something beyond themselves. Silence followed. Until Vor, who had mocked them earlier, finally admitted something. If you put that kind of species in charge of a starship, they won't just win wars. They'll never stop. Cale turned to him. That's what scares. Not that they fight, but why they fight. A beat passed. Then Lyra said what none of them wanted to hear aloud. If the Council ever provokes them, they won't negotiate. They'll fight until they win or until there's nothing left. Back in the halls, the lights flickered in soft hues as the Academy prepared for rest cycles. But Cale's team didn't sleep. They couldn't. They had looked into the human soul and seen a fire they didn't understand. Not the kind that burns planets, but the kind that burns for meaning. And once lit, it never goes out. The breaking point, the next evening, the team wasn't the same. They walked, slower, spoke less. But when they spoke, it was with precision. Something had shifted, not just in how they viewed humans, but how they viewed themselves. Cale requested another session in the archives. He didn't ask the others. He knew they'd follow. This time, he asked the computer for something specific. Show us Earth's elite warriors in modern combat, special forces in real-world missions. The screen shifted. The first clip was grainy but intense. Urban warfare in Fallujah, human soldiers moving door to door, using hand signals, covering angles and clearing buildings. Fast, clean, terrifyingly efficient. In one frame, a human soldier was shot in the arm, blood spraying across a wall. He grimaced, tied a bandage, with his teeth and kept moving. He's still fighting, Tren whispered. Then came Mogadishu. Black Hawk Down footage. Soldiers surrounded, pinned down. Rescue impossible. They fought all night. A team of 4 defended a crash site for hours with limited ammo, refusing to leave their wounded behind. Vor's arms were folded, his thick brows knit tight. Every doctrine says this is suicide, but they didn't hesitate. Lyra's eyes were locked on the screen. Look at them. They're not just trained. They believe something. The footage shifted again, to Desert Storm, airstrikes, ground pushes, urban insurgency, soldiers using night vision, identifying targets precisely. They're not just aggressive, Cale noted. They're disciplined, strategic. The computer then showed SEAL team raids, small teams eliminating entire compounds of enemies with no casualties. The footage was silent, professional, clean, but it carried a weight that made even Vor shift uncomfortably. Then came the infamous training footage again. Bud S. SEER, Ranger School, British SAS Mountain Survival, French Legion Desert Isolation, Russians enduring physical beatings without flinching, the best of the best being broken down and rebuilt by choice. Computer, Lyra said, voice tight. How do humans treat captured soldiers? Standard operating protocol. Resist by all means, attempt escape, do not comply, even under torture. The display now showed a human pilot in captivity during the Vietnam War. He blinked repeatedly in Morse code while being filmed. His message, torture. In another, a soldier, having been beaten for days, still refused to give up information. His ribs were broken, his fingers crushed. Still, he smiled during the interrogation. Vor stood. What are we watching? This isn't just warfare, it's Something else. They're forged, Tren said slowly. Not trained, forged. Like steel. Kale closed his eyes. Let's find out what drives that forge. He turned back to the interface. Computer, show us the ideology, the beliefs, the values they fight for. A pause, then displaying human military creeds, cultural philosophies, and war memorials. The screen filled with words, etched into marble or whispered at funerals. Freedom isn't free. All gave some gave all. Never forget the fallen. My loyalty is to the one on my left and my right. Images followed. Fathers hugging children before deployment, letters stained with dirt and blood, taps playing over folded flags, thousands of graves perfectly lined, names carved in silence. They honor their dead like saints, Lyra whispered. They fight so the next generation won't have to, Kale added. They build stories out of sacrifice. The group fell quiet again. That silence was always different now, not awkward but sacred. But this time it was Tren who broke it. Let's ask the hard question, he said, his gills twitching. Computer, what happens if humans ever discover they've been contained? Simulated scenarios indicate initial confusion, followed by outrage, followed by large-scale mobilization. Likelihood of diplomatic negotiation, 2%. Likelihood of unified planetary retaliation, 81%. Probability of interstellar conflict, 94%. Lyra's eyes widened. Even if they know they can't win, humans exhibit an unusually high tolerance for suicidal odds when moral or existential threats are perceived. Kale exhaled slowly. They'll fight anyway. The final simulation began. A projection. What would happen if humans joined the galactic community with full access to technology? Within 4 years, they adapted every known ship weapon. Within 6, they modified tactical doctrines. Within 10, their elite forces outperformed every known species military unit. Within 20, they led the fleets, Vor said, almost reverently. They redefined warfare, Lyra added. Kale didn't move. He felt it in his bones now. Not fear. Awe. They don't fight for power, he said quietly. They fight because they believe they must, because they carry the weight of the ones who didn't make it. He stared at the final line of the simulation. Conclusion. Humanity is not a military threat because of what they fight with. They are a threat because of what they're willing to fight for. The choice to fear them or learn from them. The presentation room was filled with buzzing excitement. Cadets from over 20 alien species gathered in the observation decks above, eager to mock what was supposed to be a class on lesser species. Human warfare wasn't taken seriously by most in the Galactic Warfare Academy. Not until today. Commander Thalexa entered, her exo-armor gleaming like a storm cloud. She surveyed the students with that calculating silence that always made the TU air colder. When she called for Kale's team, no one expected much. Kale stepped forward with Tren, Lyra, and Vor behind him. Their faces looked worn, less like cadets and more like war historians who had aged a decade in a week. Begin, the commander said without emotion. Kale didn't need notes. Our assignment was to analyze a primitive species called humans. Our findings, he paused. They changed everything we know about war. Lyra activated the holoscreen. The first footage played. Normandy Beach, Omaha sector. Humans charging into machine gun fire. Dozens fell. Others leaped over their bodies and kept going. The crowd laughed at first until they realized the humans weren't stopping, and the bullets weren't either. Lyra spoke. These weren't elite units. These were mostly conscripts, civilians with minimal training. Yet they stormed a fortified coastline knowing they were outgunned. Next was Vietnam. A squad moved silently through jungle under triple canopy. Enemy fire erupted. One soldier was hit, and another ran through the bullets to drag him to safety. They don't run, Tren said softly, watching the screen. Even when they should. Then came the Fallujah clearance footage. House-to-house fighting, grenade traps, booby traps. Yet the humans persisted systematically, tactically, and fearlessly. Vor stepped forward. Their elite forces are trained to endure what most of us can't even comprehend. Cold, hunger, sleep deprivation, pain, torture. They don't just survive it. They use it. The screen shifted again, this time to Hell Week from SEAL training. 1. Cadet vomited, collapsed, got up, vomited again, and kept going. A murmur rippled through the audience. "What are we seeing?" asked a skeptical Norqual cadet. Lyra turned. "This is not just strength. This is will." Then Tren said something no one expected from a soft-voiced, peace-dwelling aquatic. "I watched one of them perform surgery on himself during a firefight, without anesthesia, while giving orders." Gasps filled the room. Kale stepped forward again. "We tried to compare their strategies to ours. We failed. Because their greatest weapon isn't a gun, or a ship, or an elite unit." He paused. "It's their capacity to suffer." On screen, a Navy SEAL continued fighting after a leg wound. Another soldier shielded civilians from a mortar blast with his own body. The footage ended on a still shot. A row of human graves, each marked with a helmet, a pair of boots, and a flag. Lyra added gently, "They don't just fight for land. They fight for ideals, freedom, honor, loyalty. They die for people they love, sometimes even for strangers." Silence. Not even the ventilation system seemed to breathe. "Do you expect us to believe this romantic nonsense?" barked an instructor. From the rear, Kale didn't flinch. "We didn't believe it either, until we saw it. Until we felt it." Commander Thalexa finally spoke. "Then answer this. Do you believe humans are a threat?" Kale hesitated, then answered, voice calm but filled with truth. "No. They're not a threat because they want war. They're a threat because they endure it like no other species ever recorded. Because when they lose, they keep fighting." The room erupted. Voices, disbelief, shouts, until a new hologram appeared. One no cadet had ever seen before, a top-level security file. Commander Thalexa had triggered it herself. The seal read, "Classified Council Directive, QG X-117A, Human Containment." The room went dead silent. "Humans," she said, "are not part of the Galactic Alliance, not because they're weak, but because they are the only species ever quarantined for psychological warfare resilience." Murmurs turned into dread. "They are the only known civilization that became more aggressive after developing nuclear weapons. The only one to experience genocide and still rebuild. The only one to choose suicide missions as common doctrine." Another screen played now. Humans discovering interstellar communication. Their messages were scrambled. Probes redirected. "We've kept them isolated," the commander continued. "Because if they leave that planet, we cannot predict what they'll become." Vor looked around the stunned hall. "But maybe isolation isn't enough anymore." Kale's voice broke through. "We don't know how long Earth will stay quiet. They're already developing spaceflight. Already touching the edges of our silence." The audience sat frozen, not in fear of what humans had done, but in fear of what they hadn't done yet. Commander Thalexa stepped down. "Half of you will resign by morning," she said coldly. "The other half will choose to understand." Kale, Tren, Lyra, and Vor stood silently, watching the final footage play on the screen. A soldier waving goodbye to his daughter, whispering, "I'll come back if I can. But if I don't, remember, I did it for you, not a monster, not a brute, just a human, willing to die for something bigger than himself." What the stars should fear by dawn, the academy was changed. Over a dozen cadets had filed resignation papers. Many gave vague reasons: misalignment with curriculum, psychological fatigue. But everyone knew the truth. They had seen something that didn't just shift their understanding of warfare, it had fractured their perception of control. Commander Thalexa accepted the resignations without comment. She'd seen it before, and she would see it again. But 4 cadets didn't walk away. Kale, Tren, Lyra, and Vor stayed. Not because they weren't afraid, but because they knew fear wasn't the lesson. That morning, Kale stood alone in the observation dome, gazing out at the speckled void. The Earth simulation still hovered in the display, just a tiny blue dot. Beautiful, fragile, silent. But now, he knew. That silence wasn't weakness. It was containment. He didn't hear Commander Thalexa approach until her reflection joined his on the glass. "You didn't leave," she said. Cale didn't look away. "No, ma'am." "Why?" He thought about it before speaking. "Because if they ever come out here, someone needs to understand them. Not fear them, understand them." She nodded. "That's why I gave you the assignment." He turned to her, surprised. "You knew we would react this way?" She clicked her wrist and pulled up a secured document. It showed data from the last 50 years of this course. 79% of cadets had either dropped out, failed psychologically, or required memory suppression therapy. The remaining 21% went on to become high-level military, advisors, diplomats, or rarely Security Council representatives. "This assignment," she explained, "is a filter. We don't teach tactics here. We teach reality. And no reality is more dangerous than the one humans might one day introduce." Cale's jaw clenched. Then why keep them isolated? Why not destroy them before they advance? Thalexa looked at him sharply. "You've seen the footage. Tell me who wins that war." He didn't answer, because he couldn't. "Every simulation ends the same way," she continued. "We might win the first battle, even the second, but eventually, we lose ourselves." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Humanity doesn't just fight with weapons, they fight with ideas. They infect, not through tech, but through meaning, sacrifice, loyalty, love. Their strength isn't in their arms, it's in their spirit. And if that ever spreads across the stars..." She left the sentence unfinished. Cale looked back at the Earth. "They'll change everything," he said. She nodded. "Yes, and not everyone wants to be changed." That evening, their final report was transmitted to the Galactic Council. It was thorough. Footage, behavioral analysis, tactical models, psychological breakdowns. But the closing paragraph was the one that mattered. Cale had written it himself. Humanity is not defined by its weapons or its ships. It is defined by its willingness to suffer, to fight to die. Not for conquest, but for meaning. If this species ever turns its gaze outward, they will not ask for permission. They will not seek acceptance. They will endure until they belong. And if we stand in their way, we will not be fighting an army. We will be fighting an idea. The next day, Cale's group presented their report in a private council simulation room. A projection of Earth rotated before the council's watching eyes. Holographic displays played the highlights of humanity's most harrowing conflicts. Members of the council, a dozen alien races centuries old, watched in rigid silence. Some looked disturbed, others skeptical. One, however, leaned forward. Centauri Elder, skin silver like molten mercury, spoke slowly. "They still use combustion engines. Their ships are barely fast enough to reach their moon, and yet you fear them." Cale stepped forward. His voice was steady. "We don't fear their technology. We fear their inevitability." Silence again. Then the Centauri asked, "Do they know we exist?" "Not fully," Lyra answered. "We've blocked their deep space transmissions, redirected their probes. Their best scientists believe they're alone." "Good." Another counselor murmured. "Let them remain in darkness." But Thalexa shook her head. "They won't stay there forever. You all know it." The Centauri turned. "Then what would you have us do?" No one answered. Because no one knew. Destroy them? They would martyr themselves and make legends of their ruins. Integrate them? They would adapt, learn everything, and rise faster than any before. Ignore them? They would keep growing, testing, surviving, and eventually reach the stars. Cale whispered something he hadn't meant to say aloud. Maybe we should be learning from them. All eyes turned to him. "What did you say, cadet?" One counselor asked sharply. He looked up. "They've survived everything their world has thrown at them. Natural disasters, internal wars, plagues, genocide, nuclear fire. And still, they hope. Still, they build. The silence stretched. Kale didn't shrink back. They're not a virus, they're not monsters, they're something we haven't seen before. The Centauri narrowed his eyes. And what's that? Kale spoke clearly. They're becoming. Thalexa looked at him, then smiled, just a little. The session ended in silence, but the ripples had started. Later that night, Kale stood alone again. Tren joined him quietly. Do you think they'll ever reach us? Tren asked. Kale nodded. Yes, not today. Not next cycle. But someday. Tren's glow dimmed in worry. And then what? Kale's eyes searched the stars. Then we find out, he said, if the galaxy can survive what Earth creates next. The day they break the silence. 3 months passed. The academy returned to its rhythm. New cadets arrived. Others graduated. The story of the human assignment faded into whispers and rumors. Some called it exaggeration. Others called it propaganda. But Kale, Tren, Lyra, and Vor had changed. They walked the halls with new awareness. They approached combat theory with deeper caution, and during simulations they stopped underestimating desperation as a weakness, because they had learned that desperation, in the hands of a human, was a weapon more terrifying than any blade. 1. Evening. A priority alert echoed through the main atrium. A probe had been intercepted, not one of theirs. It was human. Everyone gathered around the projection in the central dome. The tiny object rotated slowly on the screen, Earth's blue, insignia clearly visible on its side. A message pulsed in ancient binary. It was a repeating phrase. We are not alone. Commander Thalexa arrived moments later, her face unreadable. She scanned the message, then played the attached video. It wasn't a transmission meant for war. It was a broadcast of hope. Images flashed of Earth, oceans, forests, children laughing, space launches. Astronauts waving from cramped stations. A woman reciting the words of a poem as stars glowed behind her. Though we are small, our dreams reach beyond the moon. We seek not to conquer, but to belong. And yet, the broadcast ended with a final image, a wall, carved into stone were the names of the fallen, soldiers, doctors, rescuers, civilians. Underneath just one line, so that others may live free. The dome was silent. Kale whispered, they're coming. No one disagreed. Later that night, a council-wide session was held in secret. Thalexa was present. So was Kale's group. Alongside them sat generals, scientists, historians, elders, who had watched empires rise and fall. The question was simple. What now? Destroy the probe. Send a false reply. Tighten the containment perimeter. Kale stood up when no one else would. They already know they're not alone. It's not a matter of if they come, it's when, a Sarnathi diplomat hissed. Then we must prepare for war. Kale didn't flinch. If we go to war, we will lose more than ships. We'll lose what makes us different. He paused, then added, we'll lose to ourselves. Then what? Do you suggest? Asked a Venari tactician. We surrender before they even arrive? No, Kale said. We listen, we learn, maybe even invite, not to teach them, but to be taught. The room boiled in noise, unthinkable, dangerous, suicidal, until Thalexa rose, and the room fell silent again. There is one truth about humans, she said calmly. They don't seek to be feared. They seek to be seen. She activated the final segment of the probe's transmission. It was a simple sentence written in 112 languages, including 5 known galactic dialects. If you see this, we welcome you. We come in peace, but we will stand for our own. No threats, no ultimatums, just a promise and a warning. Kale watched the words shimmer in the air, and for the first time since this journey began, he smiled. They're not monsters, he said, quietly. They're mirrors. They show us what we fear about ourselves. Weeks later, deep within council chambers, a unanimous vote was taken. A single reply. Just one. Encoded in the same dialects. We see you. The probe transmitted the response across light years. No one knew how long it would take to be received. But when it was, humanity would know, and they would come. Years later, when Earth's first real starship crossed the galactic barrier, it did not arrive with weapons drawn. It came with flags, music, books, questions, and eyes that burned, with the hunger to understand. Vor, now a frontline commander, watched as the first delegation stepped off the human vessel. Their eyes held weariness, but not weakness. Their uniforms bore no weapons, but their walk echoed the tread of generations who had known war and refused to be broken by it. A woman stepped forward, her voice calm, her eyes unflinching. We're here to learn, but we're also here to remember, and we never forget the cost of being underestimated. And just like that, the room adjusted, not with fear, but with respect. From the farthest edge of the known galaxy to the academy halls where Kale now taught, the message became legend, not because of what humans had built, but because of what they were willing to become. And as Kale watched the Earth ship disappear into the stars, exploring, questioning, building bridges across cultures and constellations, he felt no fear, only wonder, because for the first time the stars weren't watching humans. Humans were watching the stars, and they were no longer alone.